Hello, I'm your host Jim McLean. Welcome back to a brand new series of the BanterFlix movie review show here on NvTv. Let's see what movies we'll be talking about tonight. We'll be looking back at some of the films released whilst we've been off air over the summer. We'll review The Sound of Freedom, which is out in cinemas now, and we'll wrap up by chatting about 101 Dalmatians, which is being re-released this week as part of Disney's 100th anniversary celebrations. So that's a look at what we'll be discussing this week, and joining me in the studio as we kick off this new series, we're going to start it as we mean to finish this series. I'm joined by Alan Meban. Alan, I usually only have you in at Christmas. Sometimes we get you in through the year, but I know later in the year you're going to be wrapping up all the films we've looked at through 2023, but I thought we'd get you on now, first show of the new series. So how's your summer been?
It hasn't been too bad. We're kind of more than halfway through the year. We've had a few blockbustery things to kind of keep us cinematically engaged, and there seems to be a whole roll of things kind of coming out now over the last kind of couple of weeks and the next few weeks. I wonder, is there another kind of hump or another dip coming where we're going to run out of things with the studios being on strike and things, but actors on strike, but yeah, it's a good time.
Yeah, we do have not only a writer's strike, but an actor's strike, which happened whilst we've been off air, and we've returned in September. We thought it would be cooler in the studio because it gets too hot over the summer for us, for people like me who like to wear our cinematic movie-loving jackets, but we're in the middle of a heat wave again, so it is warm. You can see both you and I, we are already kind of suitably ready for this evening to talk about all things movies. Everyone over the summer was, or possibly everyone, was taking part in Barbenheimer. I know I did. You had Barbie, and then you had to go see Chris Nolan's Oppenheimer. I love that film, I have to say. I mean, it is 3 hours, it is long. Again, there is flaws, but I think there's a bit of gratuitous nudity and a sex scene that the film doesn't really need. But what can I say? Cillian Murphy is outstanding in the lead role in this film. Were you a fan?
Yeah, I saw it a couple of days before Barbie, and it was long, but it didn't feel long, given that there were kind of 3 stories. That every hour kind of tells a different story in a sense. You've kind of got the build-up, you've got the actual kind of testing of the bomb, and then you've got kind of the hearings and the trials and the tribulations that kind of came afterwards. There are disappointments. I mean, Christopher Nolan tells an ambitious story and he does it well. I'm not sure there are many other directors who would have bitten off as much and given it as good a chew as he did. It's definitely not perfect. It's not his best film by any stretch of the imagination. I didn't like the visualization of fusion and things. That always distracted me, even though I've kind of a maths background and used to hang around with physicists. But there was something about it that kind of captured I liked the use of black and white and colour. That worked, though some other people that seemed to confuse. It was an interesting film. My biggest disappointment with it is the fact that it sticks so rigidly to, if you like, the American view of their part, and the attempts to try and empathise with what it might have been for those who were victims of the bomb being dropped on them, survivors and so on, that it deals with that, but in a couple of minutes. It does it quite well, but it's so short that it barely kind of registers. Some people won't even have realised that's quite what was happening. And for me, that kind of negates the whole kind of emphasis of, to understand the story, you need to understand both the people who made it, the people who decided to drop it, and the people who it dropped upon, and what the repercussions are. So it cheated in that area, but maybe it's one of those things you can't do everything. But for me, that knocks a couple of points off in a sense, because maybe Christopher Nolan could have also found a way of telling a bit of that story, but I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, there's things like you, I think, that are flawed. You've mentioned the use of black and white and colour. I think everyone kind of thought going in that would be Chris Nolan's typical use of time, but the more you read about it, it's more about perspectives and whose kind of perspective you're looking at throughout those scenes, which I thought was clever. We haven't mentioned the score, which I thought, as always for a Chris Nolan film, sadly no Hans Zimmer, but I thought it was stupendous. And the visuals, the use of the IMAX camera, not for big wide shots, but for close-up looking at Cillian Murphy's face. What can I say? He's a dreamboat. I'll stare at those big blue eyes any day.
And I didn't see it in IMAX, which I slightly regret, though. if we come back to one of your flaws, in a sense, the sex scene, or the prolonged nudity, I think as the BBFC would call it, it did seem a bit gratuitous. It's one of the first times that he's tried that in his films. I don't think he's quite learned how to do it. It was kind of unnecessary in the way that maybe in some other films we might talk about. It's maybe a bit more necessary to tell the story. But anyway, he's trying, and he can't make brilliant films every time, but he certainly has the money and the backing to do ambitious things.
I can see the movie poster now for Oppenheimer, Alan Meban. Chris Nolan's trying. I can see it happening. Look, I mean, we can't sit and spend the rest of the whole show talking about Oppenheimer. There is, I feel, a time possibly at the end of the year where we can come back to discussing this. One last film I do want to mention, I don't know if you've seen it or not yet at this point, is Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning. You are a fan of the action movie genre. I mean, you are Alan Atomic Blonde forever here at BanterFlix. But I enjoyed it. I mean, it hasn't found the huge box office success of its predecessor. I think there is talk that this film has underperformed. It had been expected much, much more. It did get high praise. I got to see it on the IMAX screen at a press screening at the Cineworld. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. Yes, it is long. Yes, it is baggy. I don't think it's as good as Fallout, but I will happily pay to see Tom Cruise run. He's doing all the running I need to do. What can I say? He
runs so knowingly now. And I think that was what made this film work, was the fact that it was very knowingly. It knew that it was a Mission Impossible film. They knew that they were acting and playing characters in a Mission Impossible film. So everything about it was a bit tongue-in-cheek. It's a bit like going back to Barbie. It understood where it lay in people's affections. And I think for that reason it works. I think one of the reasons it doesn't work particularly well is the fact that it's half a film, and it's very difficult to get a feeling of completeness in that. But it had the running, it had some great kind of gags in terms of car chases and things. It worked well. Tom Cruise can still pull it off, but will everybody who saw it want to run back and see the second half? I think that's the real test, is, will you get the kind of repeat viewing when you actually come back with the rest, which presumably they've already made it. At least I hope they made the two at the same time. No, maybe not.
No.
Oh dear, okay, but it could be a lot of people kind of, maybe we'll never see the far end of it. It could be like June 2,
I guess it's a film a bit like June. Well, June is a different story. June has been postponed because of the fact of the writer's strike, that they are worried that a big sci-fi feature like that, they need a huge big press hurrah to market the film. That's why that's been delayed until March next year. With Dead Reckoning Part 2, it's more a case that it has to be finished. And unfortunately, the actors are now on strike. Hopefully, the studios will get that deal with. It is ironic, a film like Dead Reckoning, where AI is front and centre within the narrative, without going into spoilers, that AI is part of the main reason. And I know on the last season, we were obsessed. Every week we talked about AI, it seems. So this is our obligatory reference to the technology as we kick off the later episodes in this year. But yes, AI, ironic that it's part of the franchise and it's part of the reason why we might get to see that film delayed. Look, there are other films that have been released over the summer months. We won't have time right now to get into them all. But very quickly, we've just come through Cinema Day, National Cinema Day. Thousands of people have went to independent franchise cinemas across across the UK and Ireland. I went to see Barbie for the second time. I also checked out Jurassic Park, packed screening, a lot of younger viewers in there as well. Great to see that Spielberg film that celebrates its 30th anniversary this year still works on the big screen. Some of the special effects have dated, but some of them are still timeless. Thoroughly enjoyed myself. Alan, what did you go check out?
I went to see Tarach, which is a new Irish film, roughly the story of a woman who comes home to her father to look after him. He's recuperating from a heart attack, and she kind of falls back in love with rowing, and there's a bit of a competition, and she joins the local rowing team, and they make a bit of a go of it to try and do it. It's a good Irish language film. It's not too twee. There are plot holes galore in it. But it was like a good afternoon and a fairly full screening at the QFT to see it. It was good to see actually nearly all the local cinemas, except what I might call the posh one. All were taking part in the kind of £3 a ticket. And that was good to see that actually widespread, that Cinema Day was something that everybody could take a family for a pretty affordable day at the cinema.
Well, Alan, everybody loves cinema here, even the posh ones.
Even the posh cinema.
Even the posh ones.
I haven't been in it yet, actually.
Well, you're missing out. But look, we're going to talk about a film that you and I have both seen. So I think without any further ado, let's move on to our first review of the episode. Let's talk about Sound of Freedom.
How'd that make you feel? Giving a child his freedom.
Felt good.
You have been at this for 12 years.
My country, 'tis of thee.
Why are you doing it?
Because God's children are not for sale. It is the fastest growing international crime network that the world has ever seen.
We're Homeland Security. You know we can't go off rescuing Honduran kids in Colombia.
This job tears you to pieces. And this is my one chance to put those pieces back together.
And yet somehow you have failed to bring me one real-world lead.
It's over, Tim. Close up and come back home.
So that's a look at Sound of Freedom. It's out in cinemas now. Alan, I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot about Sound of Freedom over the cinema, particularly its release in the States, the fact it was a film that was originally dropped by Disney back in 2018. They seemingly didn't want to release this film out into multiplexes. Stars Jim Caviezel as a Homeland Security agent who is going out to reunite a father with his two children who've found themselves sold into the sex trade. So we will say right from the get-go, this is a film that does deal with some delicate subject matter. There's two aspects of the film. The film itself, which any movie review show should discuss, but also a lot of the stuff behind the scenes. I think we'll start first and foremost by reviewing the film, what we've seen. I was underwhelmed by this. You know, I'm someone who's kind of grew up used to the likes of Liam Neeson sweeping in to save the day. This is very much in that similar kind of sorts. White saviour syndrome does loom large in here, and America sweeping in to save the day. There's other things I want to talk about. I think it's a perfectly serviceable action movie, but I wasn't necessarily engaged by it. And I think the key problem is the action sequences of this film are a bit underwhelming, but then it is lower budget. But coming back to, we've mentioned a couple of films over the summer in the States, this has performed very well in America. Compared to its box office, it's overperformed the likes of Mission Impossible. It's found an audience, but again, there's aspects of that we have to come to when we're discussing the distribution of the film or the production of the film. First and foremost, what do you think?
I think it's quite pedestrian. I think you can tell that it was made in the cheap. Not that it's not that cheap, it's millions and millions, but it's made in the cheap. The action sequences don't have that many people in them. They don't have that many effects, kind of real life or CGI'd. You have the central character who can seemingly he could practically swim down the Amazon, kind of swing through the trees, and he could kind of rescue people on his tiptoes and race away and get away with it. And so in a sense there's a whole lot of kind of dirt and kind of grimness that normally comes with action films. He barely gets kind of dirt under his fingernails. So it's also a fairly pedestrian plot in a sense. It kind of goes very linearly through the thing. We don't fall in love with this character in particular, as certainly I don't. And he's based on a real man who did give up his job in kind of Homeland Security to go and kind of rescue trafficked kids. And there's something of a, I suppose the heart behind the film is to kind of raise awareness, clearly within a US audience, given the way that it's been kind of portrayed and some of the language used. It's very much there to try and raise awareness of child trafficking, that it happens, to kind of warn people that it's about, and then to do something about it. And I think for me, the most problematic bits of the film, as maybe we kind of come to now, are the fact that it's quite manipulative, I think, as a film, and it's not manipulative with a particularly good heart. It's kind of done quite crassly. If there was a call to action in this film, it would be to do something around kids that are getting trafficked. It'd be to do something around governments who play a blind eye or don't do enough policy-wise to actually kind of apprehend those and make it difficult to traffic children. But instead, the call to action at the end of the film, if you stay for the trailers, there's a 2-minute kind of monologue telling you to go to this QR code and pay it forward, buy a cinema ticket for someone to come along, and you kind of realise, well, is this even still working when it's kind of now in the UK? And is this basically just filling up your box office figures because there's empty seats potentially that you're buying? How do people access those tickets? It kind of doesn't really explain any of that. I think it's very one-dimensional in how it tells the story. I noticed that the real life Tim was rescuing adults and children who were trafficked. The film sticks to cute kids because that's kind of better. It's totally white saviour. Now, the real person that they're basing it on, it happens to be white, it happens to be US. But if you wanted to make a film about this, there are countless other ways you could have kind of adapted it to do that, and they have chosen not to. And I think, in a sense, the most moving thing in the film is the little kind of boy, Miguel, who's played by Lucas Avilla, and he's a really moving child performer. His eye contact, his emotion, what he says without opening his mouth is brilliant. He has a career on stage and on screen ahead of him. But frankly, Jim Caviezel he wasn't the best thing about Person of Interest, that CBS series, and he's not the best thing about this film either. And Walt Disney were right to shelve it. It's just a wasted opportunity to talk about child trafficking in a decent film. Now, saying all of that, the people around me in the cinema where you could have heard a pin drop. It was really silent. People were really paying attention. Many of them were there and were very taken with it. They'd come specifically to see it. They're clearly not all regular cinema goers. So it was kind of doing something. However, I wondered, does that also slightly fed into the kind of the QAnon kind of stories along the edges of this film, and some of the kind of things that people believe around trafficking that aren't true. It happens a lot. It's very bad. However, some of the detail that people embellish it with is definitely not.
Look, I will agree. I went to see this in the Lisburn Omniplex. Like you, when I was watching it, I did find it mediocre. I think it's long, it's baggy, it does need to be edited with a chainsaw. My lovely wife and I came out and she turned to me and said, well, Jim Caviezel, he's just the Wish version of Bradley Cooper, because he does look quite similar to him. You kind of wish you had Bradley Cooper in that leading role, but I don't think Bradley Cooper, he's made some poor choices over the years. Bradley, I'm still angry about The Hangover, that's all I'm going to say, but I don't think you'll find him in this project. Yes, the QAnon politics and kind of all the stuff that's involved, the QAnon links to the production side of this. It's from a faith-based production company, and it does feel very much like this is a feature that's playing on the same kind of, and marketed itself in the same way that The Passion of the Christ did. And we have Jim Caviezel, who most people will know from that film. Mel Gibson is a producer on this project as well. So you can see the similarities there, like as you've mentioned in the post-credits, although it does give a handy little countdown to announcement coming.
You have 2 minutes to get out.
Which would be handy, I think, for Marvel movies. Take note. But I do find it manipulative. It talks about wanting to stop God's children from being stolen.
There's
and not
3 or 4 references to God, and it's underplayed,
Yeah.
but it's very specifically put. It works for an evangelical audience.
Yes.
This is going to go around kind of certain churches. This will be kind of compulsory viewing.
I know we're pushing on time, but I think my problem with that is the fact that the 2 children that are meant to be being saved in this film, we don't really get to know them. Yes, they are engaging in when they're on screen, but the focus is never really on them. Look, I thought it was serviceable. I'll not be rushing out to rewatch it. I didn't donate for afterwards with my QR code, but it will be interesting to see where it finishes, if it finds an audience here in the UK. It clearly has in the States. There is also links to kind of the Trumpism and kind of all that kind of movement. I know Donald Trump has hosted screenings of the film as well. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see in a week or two where this film features within the UK box office. But with that, let's move on And we were talking whilst we were off air what we were up to in the summer. One of the things I got to do was I got to go to the Edinburgh International Film Festival. Hadn't been there for quite some time. Over the next couple of episodes we will have a few little segments and interviews from that. But one of the films I did get to see, one of the films that features within our podcast special from the Edinburgh Film Festival, check it out viewers, is the Ira Sachs, the director of Passages, which you have seen, and also
Yes.
Past Lives. So those are two films that featured at the Edinburgh Festival. Very quickly and as succinctly as you can, tell our viewers why they should seek those films out.
Well, we can do both in the same time because they are both love triangles. So effectively, Passages is about a gay couple, one of whom has an affair with a woman, and as that kind of untangles, we kind of realise that this is a set of relationships based around sex. Sorry if you're watching this at tea time. And we, I guess, kind of explore those characters and their what drives them, what makes them feel kind of petty about themselves, what makes them kind of do strange things. There's a BAFTA-winning bottom that will be very memorable. Ben Whishaw will definitely have trophies, but maybe not for what he wanted.
Paddington Bear.
But that's Passages. It's kind of an interesting film. It's also interesting to try and figure out, could it have been done without the sex, less explicitly? Could you still have told the story? One kind of TV director who I was talking to, kind of walking along the street, said, of course, you can tell all these stories without this. It's completely unnecessary. They didn't need to do it. So it is thought-provoking, but it is fairly kind of strong and deserves its certificate. Past Lives is a different love triangle. It's about two children who knew each other, who've I guess become reacquainted later in life. She is now married, living in America, but her kind of South Korean schoolmate has been kind of following her around at intervals. She keeps leaving, breaking things off, and they, I guess, have a final kind of attempt to kind of get to know each other. Again, it's more about romantic love, and it's an interesting just to have these very small. I guess this is kind of the COVID legacy that we have of films which have very small central characters, very small numbers of people in scenes and things. But these kind of love triangles, they're kind of fascinating to watch. And I think of the two, probably Past Lives is my favourite.
Two interesting films, Alan, and I know Past Lives is now available to watch at the QFT. So look, with that, let's move on, wrap up this week's show and have a look at our second film we're going to be discussing, and that's 101 Dalmatians.
The word is out. Here again is Walt Disney's wonderful feature-length cartoon, 101 Dalmatians. An especially unique approach to an unusual dog story, featuring 101 colorful Disney characters. London's Dalmatian population is missing. Meet the exotic beauty who runs the racket.
Hello.
And her dumb delinquents who give the runaround to the best brains in dogdom. A big hullabaloo.
No time to explain. I'm afraid there's trouble. Come along.
Yes, come along to mirthful mystery and comic villainy. Recommended for everyone. Walt Disney's cartoon feature, 101 Dalmatians.
So that's a look at 101 Dalmatians. No, it's not the live-action version with Glenn Close, and it's not the live-action version with Emma Stone either. It's the animated original, Disney's 17th animated movie, if I'm correct. It's been re-released in cinemas, Alan, to celebrate the House of Mouse's 100th anniversary. So, my lovely wife and I, we went to see Peter Pan, we went to see Cinderella, we will be going to see 101 Dalmatians. My hot take for this week's episode, my hot take, viewers, this is probably one of my favourite Disney animated movies. I love 101 Dalmatians. Rewatching it for the episode, I just forgot how charming it was from Pongo, Perdita, just even Cruella de Vil, up there, if not one of the iconic Disney villains. I know we've got the likes of Maleficent as well, and Bits and Bobs, and Ursula in Little Mermaid, but Cruella de Vil, she has her own song, Cruella. I'm not even going to start singing it now at this time in the evening, but Alan, I love this, and it was an absolute pleasure to rewatch it for the show, and I'm looking forward to seeing it back in the cinema again.
I feel slightly old in this, though not as old as the film, 1961. However, it passed me by. It wasn't, I guess it wasn't on TV when I was kind of growing up, and so we kind of missed it in the cinema, missed it on TV, wasn't watching kind of Disney VHSs by the stage that it came out. It's a very therapeutic watch, though. I did feel, I mean, you could show it to people and their heart rate would just kind of calm down. It's a very gentle watch. It's a children's movie. Clearly, it doesn't really try to do anything very adult at all. It's quite fun. It's got puppies in it. In fact, it's got anything beginning with P in it, from pianos, police, park, puppies, Prissy the poodle, making pelts into fur coats. Everybody's name seems to begin with P. So
yes, viewers, Alan really did make a list of everything beginning with P in that film.
But you can see the start of other things in it as well. I mean, Cruella de Vil is nearly Penelope Pitstop. You know, women in fast cars that go around corners, that kind of swerve, back wheels swerve around corners. There are bits of this that have been taken later on by other studios and kind of reused. I suspect this is the start of kind of chases and so on, what you can do with what a cartoon chase looks like. This is the first time we see it.
The only thing I will say is Penelope Pitstop is a much better driver than Cruella de Vil.
Well, indeed, but there's not a lot happen. There's not very much happens in the film. I mean, if you were a child told to write a small essay about this film, about 4 sentences would sum it up. But on the other hand, it is more than serviceable. It is charming. It is a delight to watch the dogs do their thing. The dogs who kind of multiply over time to eventually get to the 101. You start with 1, 2, and then it gets bigger. There's a kind of an interesting game of whispers as they try and you're kind of thinking this is going to go wrong. We're going to end up saying that, I don't know, kind of 2 cats have been kind of kidnapped. But no, the message gets all the way across the country and that people have to get rescued. It's fun. It has aged well. It doesn't feel that out of date, even though the animation techniques were very basic. In fact, this one was very cheaply done in a sense. But actually, it's got real Disney character to it. It does animals well, and it has it lets them outstrip the humans at all times. Even at the very beginning, the big hint is that the dog takes his owner for a walk and gets his own way with where they will go. So I think it's very, very Disney-esque, and good luck seeing it. It'd be interesting to see on a big Cinemax screen actually, instead of on a kind of a small TV screen.
I have to say, I haven't got the chance to rewatch some of the films that Disney have re-released. Seeing them on the big screen again, some of them I've never seen in the cinema before. 101 Dalmatians, I don't think, in terms, forgetting the live action and the Cruella reboot, kind of prequel, whatever you want to call it, with Emma Stone. I've seen those in the cinema, never saw this, so I'm looking forward to seeing it on the big screen and just, generally just enjoying those Disney classics. Coming back to what you say, there are some of the animated Disney films within their back catalogue, Aristocats, I'm looking at you, that have not aged well. They do have to have the little warning about kind of certain cultural misappropriations. They have to be there. We don't see this with 101 Dalmatians. Coming back to what you said, I think it's a perfect way to finish it. It's just a lovely, charming film, and I can't think of a better way for someone this weekend watching this show. From all the films we've already discussed, I can't think of anything better than watching 101 Dalmatians in this crazy world we live in. Just tune out for an hour and a half and enjoy some classic Disney. But look, that is all we have time for on this week's show. Before we wrap things up and I say my goodbye to yourself, Alan, let's have a look what films we'll be discussing next week.
Something wrong with the school. Something doesn't feel right.
I have given a name to my pain. Batman.
He's out there right now. I've got to go to work.
If you gotta go with the smoke.
So that's a look at The Nun and Batman, which is being re-released for Batman Day next week. Alan, who knew? Everybody has their own day. Maybe one day there'll be a BanterFlix day. But The Nun 2 or Tim Burton's Batman, either of those piquing your interest?
I think Batman, maybe just to go back to see what it started out as.
You'll have to wait till next week to see what we think of the films, Alan. But with that, we shall wrap up. So all that's left for me to do is thank you very much for taking the time this evening to sit and chat all things movie related with me. So all that's left for me to do now is thank you very much for watching. We'll be back next week with another episode. But for now, until then, goodbye.